Okay, I have been kicked out, so I'm going to log back in. And now we're going to go over standard service reports. So again, reports, standard, and I'm going to run this services report, which I've actually already run for calendar year 2023. So I am going to go directly to that report. These are separate. I'm going to go over those shortly, but I'm going to run through these first. So here is my services report. Again, for just my center, I selected the main center only, not the satellite location. Calendar year 2023. This provides an unduplicated count of all the people that received each service by service category, number of contacts, and then hours of service. And all of these are unduplicated within each category. They are also, if you look at the subtotal, this is an unduplicated count. This 18 people, that means 18 people received any of these 31 services. So this is another situation. If you were to add all these clients up, you would get a number that's probably far bigger than 18, because a lot of people receive many services. So they're going to be counted in each category where they receive that service. And then it breaks it down by adults and children. It does not break out by new versus ongoing clients. So just note that this means everybody that you have provided service to during whatever time period you've selected is included in this data table. Hours of service, it should always be rounded to the nearest quarter hour. Sometimes you will see odd numbers here. Usually that's because there is a funding filter applied to this report. If I am half funded with VOCA and I provide 0.25 hours of adult group counseling, and I want to see only the portion that VOCA paid for, well, half of 0.25 hours is rounded to 0.13. So you may see some numbers that look off here, and that's why. Okay, so if I scroll down a little further, we have breakdowns for the number of people that received emergency shelter, adults and children, as well as the number of days. And then the same with transitional housing. Now, InfoNet counts it in days. So if I go in Sunday, I leave Monday, that's 2 days, but it's one night. Sometimes you're asked for the number of nights. It's easy to figure that out. But what you have here is actually pretty close. But if you wanted to figure out the number of nights, you just want to take the total number of days. I have 5,468. And so I just take that number and then I subtract the number of people. So 20. That's the number of nights. Now, this isn't going to account for people that maybe have multiple stays within your reporting period. It's only going to subtract 1 day for that. So it's still going to be a little bit of an overcount, but it's going to get you closer to that number of nights. Okay, so for hours, I want to point out, and I alluded to this a little bit yesterday, the total number of hours represented in this table, these are direct client service hours. So for adult group counseling, it's showing 16 hours of service were provided. Now, if I scroll down further, the next table is community, institutional, and group services, or that's the next section, I should say. And the very first table is group services. This is not the direct client perspective. This is the staff and session perspective. So even though there were 16 direct client service hours for adult group counseling, we see there were only 4 presentation or session hours and 6.5 staff hours. So that means that there may have been 4, well, and how many presentations contact. So this is the number of sessions. So this means in calendar year 2023, there were 3 group sessions. All of those hours on the clock total were 4 hours. So on average, they were probably 1.25 or 1.5 hours per session. And then one of those groups probably had more than one staff facilitating. And that's why we see that the staff conduct hours is a little bit higher than the session hours or the clock hours, so to speak. So that's the difference between those different measures of hours for the same service category and why they are different sometimes. Okay, if I scroll down to, now I'm getting into the community services, which are, again, not services to clients, but to the community. And we have similar, we don't have client hours for these services, it wouldn't apply, but we do have presentation hours and staff conduct hours. Again, those are, sometimes they'll be the same, sometimes they will be different. Presentation hours simply means the hours on the clock. If it was a 2-hour presentation, you're going to see a 2 here. If 2 staff were presenting during those entire 2 hours, you're going to see 4 conduct hours here. So that's the difference. And then if you apply a funding filter to this report, it's going to impact the staff conduct hours because it wants to show how many paid staff hours were devoted to the service. It's not going to impact the session hours. So that's an example where the presentation hour may be 1 hour, okay, because it was a 1-hour presentation. But if I did this 1-hour presentation and VOCA pays for half of my time, I'm going to see a 1 here under presentation hours. Under staff conduct hours, I'm going to see 0.5 because VOCA only paid for half of that time. Okay, I think all the other columns are pretty self-explanatory, but if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat or ask when we're done recording. Here's your media publication information. Next, we get into the hotline calls, and this table is very simple. It just divides the number of calls by the hotline call type. There is no measure for the amount of time here, but you can pull that out with a management report, which I will demonstrate later. This next section simply takes services only provided by volunteers, because often programs are asked that. How many hours last quarter were your volunteers able to devote? So this report will separate that data for you. Here are your turnaways. It's simply the number of adults and children turned away. And then of those, the number that were able to be referred to another shelter or not able to be referred. And then the last section on this report is your service outcomes report. We have total yeses, total number of people that answered no, along with the total number of surveys. I think that's pretty straightforward. These 2 columns you may have questions on. So total records entered. We have this here because everybody that receives, I think, DHS or ICD funding is required to enter this once every quarter. You're welcome to enter it more often than that, but that's the minimum. So for each quarter, I want to see at least 1 record entered here. This report is for 1 whole calendar year. So if I'm a grant monitor and I'm looking at this, I should see 4, the number 4 here. If my grantee has a shelter program, and they've been keeping up to date with collecting their service outcome measures. If there's a 0 here, I'm probably going to make a phone call. So again, you want to make sure there's one record per quarter for each question. And then eligible clients, that's just kind of narrowing down who is eligible to take that survey. I am looking right now at the shelter group. Not everybody receives emergency shelter. So this 18 is simply counting the number of adult clients that were in emergency shelter during this time frame. For all the other service groups, support groups, counseling, legal advocacy, and other supportive services, this number 10 we see here is simply the number of adults who did not receive any shelter. So they're eligible to be in any one of these other service groups. And then finally, the children's services. I believe the eligibility for taking a children's service outcome surveys, they must be between the ages of 5 and 17. It might be 6. So this number 2 you see here is just the number of child clients between those age groups, or between that, in that age range, that received service. So that's what those 2 columns mean. And then last, I am not going to run this. This is pretty much obsolete by now. This is something HUD required long ago and no longer does. We don't like to take things off because even if one person finds it helpful, why remove it? You can feel free to explore it, but it probably won't provide that much useful information. I will run this though, the performance indicators report. Actually, I've already run it and have it up here. This was developed specifically for ICADV, but I think it could come in handy even if you're not an ICADV member. It simply takes all of the direct client services and groups them into 4 broader categories. So here are your counseling, therapy, and emotional support services all in one. So I know 16 people received any one of those various counseling therapy services. Economic self-sufficiency services, education, employment, and housing, legal advocacy, and then the other supportive services. So they just kind of collapse a lot of our service categories into larger categories, which can come in handy. Same with the community services. It summarized them and puts them into broader categories. Totals up your hotline calls, but you don't have a breakdown by type. And then your orders of protection. There's a note here. These numbers are not just OPs, but also orders that are upgraded. And then finally, your outcome measures, which we just finished going over in the other report. And you have this converted to percentages for you, for how many clients responded yes to each of these questions. Okay, so